It's 7:48 in the morning. The air smells like salt water and coffee. Sailors are still asleep in their bunks. Church bells will ring in a few hours. Nobody on this island has any idea that in the next 2 hours, everything about the next 4 years of human history will change. This is the last quiet morning of American peace. By 10 a.m., over 2,400 Americans will be dead. The United States Pacific Fleet will be in flames. And a country that swore it would never fight another world war, will have no choice. This is the story of how America went from watching a war from a distance, to ending it with the most powerful weapon ever built. This is the story of Pearl Harbor, Normandy, Iwo Jima, and the 6 years that reshaped the world. To understand why Pearl Harbor was such a shock, you have to understand something about America in the years before it. This was a country that had already given the World War a try once, and wanted nothing to do with it again. World War I had cost over 116,000 American lives. By the 1930s, most Americans believed getting involved in Europe's problems, or Asia's problems, had been a mistake. Congress passed a series of neutrality acts. The message was simple: whatever is happening over there, stays over there. But, over there, was getting harder to ignore. In 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and Europe was at war again. In Asia, Japan had already been fighting a brutal war in China since 1937, and was now eyeing the resource-rich colonies of Southeast Asia: rubber, oil, tin, everything a growing empire needed and didn't have. President Franklin D. Roosevelt saw what was coming before most Americans did. Publicly, he promised neutrality. Privately, he began finding ways to support Britain and China without officially entering the war: lend-lease agreements, destroyers for bases deals, oil embargoes against Japan. That last one, the oil embargo, would turn out to be one of the most consequential decisions of the century. Japan imported roughly 80% of its oil from the United States. When Washington cut off that supply in the summer of 1941 to punish Japan's aggression in China and Indochina, Japanese military planners saw only two paths forward: negotiate a humiliating retreat, or seize the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies by force, which meant war with the United States and Britain. They chose war. And they decided the only way to win it was to cripple America's Pacific Fleet before it could respond. The plan belonged to Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, ironically, a man who had studied at Harvard and knew America's industrial power better than almost anyone in Japan. He reportedly warned his own government that a long war with the United States was unwinnable. But if war was coming regardless, he believed, the only chance was a knockout blow at the very start. That knockout blow was aimed at Pearl Harbor. On November 26, 1941, 6 Japanese aircraft carriers slipped out of a remote bay in the Kuril Islands and set course for Hawaii, over 3,000 miles away, maintaining strict radio silence the entire way. American intelligence had no idea they were coming. At 6 a.m. on December 7, 1941, the first wave of 183 Japanese aircraft lifted off their carrier decks, roughly 230 miles north of Oahu. At 7:53 a.m., the lead pilot radioed back to the fleet the code words that meant complete surprise had been achieved: Tora, 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 Tiger, Tiger, Tiger. What followed was less than 2 hours of devastation. Japanese bombers and torpedo planes tore through Battleship Row. The USS Arizona took a bomb through her forward deck that detonated her ammunition magazine. She sank in under 9 minutes, taking 1,177 crewmen down with her, many of them still trapped below deck. It remains the single largest loss of life on any American ship in history. The USS Oklahoma capsized after being hit by multiple torpedoes. In total, 4 battleships were sunk, 4 more damaged, along with cruisers, destroyers, and nearly 200 aircraft destroyed, most of them still on the ground. By the time the attack ended, 2,403 Americans were dead. 1,178 more were wounded. But Japan's plan had one critical gap. The Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers, the ships that would prove decisive in the war to come, were out at sea on maneuvers that day. They weren't touched. Neither were the fuel depots or the shipyard repair facilities, both of which would prove essential to how quickly the U.S. Navy recovered. The next day, December 8, President Roosevelt addressed a joint session of Congress. He called December 7, a date which will live in infamy. Congress declared war on Japan with a single dissenting vote. 3 days later, on December 11, Adolf Hitler, under no obligation to do so, declared war on the United States. Almost overnight, isolationist America was fighting a two-front world war. What happened next inside the United States may be just as remarkable as anything that happened on a battlefield. In 1941, the U.S. military had roughly 1.6 million men in uniform and a fraction of the aircraft and ships it would eventually need. Within 4 years, over 16 million Americans would serve in uniform, and American factories would outproduce every other combatant nation on Earth, combined. Car factories in Detroit stopped making cars and started making tanks and bombers. Willow Run, a Ford plant in Michigan, was eventually producing a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes at peak output. With so many men headed overseas, the workforce shifted dramatically. Millions of American women entered factories for the first time, welding hulls, riveting aircraft wings, building engines. The image of Rosie the Riveter became a symbol of a home front transformed almost as much as the battlefield. Back home, Americans lived with rationing of gasoline, sugar, rubber, meat. Families planted victory gardens to free up commercial food supplies for the troops. War bonds drives raised billions of dollars. This wasn't just a war fought by soldiers overseas, it touched nearly every kitchen table in the country. And now the United States had to decide where to fight first. Roosevelt and his military chiefs, in agreement with Britain, made a controversial but strategically vital decision: defeat Germany first, even though Japan had attacked America directly. Germany was seen as the greater long-term threat, more industrialized, more dangerous, closer to developing devastating new weapons. That decision would shape the entire war. American troops got their first real taste of combat against Nazi Germany not in France, but in the deserts of North Africa. In November 1942, over 100,000 American and British troops landed in Morocco and Algeria in Operation Torch, America's first major offensive of the war in the European theater. It did not go smoothly at first. At the Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, inexperienced American forces suffered a bruising defeat against German General Erwin Rommel's battle-hardened Afrika Korps. It was a hard, humbling lesson, but American commanders, including a rising general named George S. Patton, adapted quickly. By May 1943, the Allies had pushed Axis forces out of North Africa entirely, capturing over 250,000 Axis troops. From there, the Allies invaded Sicily, then mainland Italy, a grinding, mountainous campaign that would drag on for nearly 2 years and prove far tougher than planners expected. Italy became what one general called, one tough gut, to fight through, but it kept German divisions tied down, divisions that couldn't be used to stop what was coming next in France. By the spring of 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in human history was being assembled on the southern coast of England. Nearly 7,000 vessels. Over 11,000 aircraft. Almost 160,000 Allied troops, ready to cross the English Channel and open a new front directly into Nazi-occupied France. The target: 50 miles of Normandy coastline, divided into 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword. American forces would land at Utah and Omaha. It began just after midnight on June 6, 1944. Paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne dropped behind enemy lines in the dark, scattered by cloud cover and anti-aircraft fire, many landing miles from their intended zones, yet still managing to disrupt German defenses and secure key roads and bridges before dawn. At first light, an enormous naval bombardment opened up on the German coastal defenses. Then, at 6:30 a.m., the first landing craft ramps dropped. Omaha Beach became the deadliest stretch of sand in the entire invasion. Rough seas had scattered landing craft off course. Pre-invasion bombing had largely missed the German bunkers on the bluffs above the beach. As the ramps dropped, soldiers walked directly into machine gun fire from fortified positions that were supposed to have already been destroyed. Many men never made it off the landing craft. Others were cut down in the surf before reaching dry sand. Companies lost most of their men in the first few minutes. By some accounts, over 2,000 American casualties occurred at Omaha Beach alone that day. But they did not stop. Small groups of leaderless men, sergeants, privates, junior officers, began organizing themselves under the bluffs, and slowly, beach by beach, section by section, they fought their way up and off Omaha. By the end of June 6, roughly 156,000 Allied troops had landed in Normandy. The beachhead held. It had cost thousands of lives, but Hitler's Fortress Europe had been breached, and it would never be sealed again. Over the following weeks, Allied forces broke out of Normandy and began pushing east. On August 25, 1944, Paris was liberated, its streets filled with cheering crowds greeting American and Free French troops. But the war in Europe was far from over. That winter, Germany would launch one last, desperate counterattack. In December 1944, German forces punched through thin American lines in the Ardennes forest in what became known as the Battle of the Bulge, the largest and bloodiest single battle American forces fought in the entire war, with over 19,000 Americans killed. Surrounded and outnumbered at the town of Bastogne, American General Anthony McAuliffe's one-word reply to a German surrender demand, "Nuts," became legend. The line held. The German offensive collapsed. It was Hitler's last real gamble, and it failed. By spring 1945, Allied forces were pushing into Germany itself from the west, while Soviet forces closed in from the east. On April 30, 1945, with Soviet troops fighting in the streets of Berlin, Adolf Hitler died by suicide in his bunker. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 7, 1945. In Europe, the war was over. But 8,000 miles away, in the Pacific, an entirely different, and in many ways even more brutal, war was still raging. The war against Japan was fought differently than the war in Europe. There was no single front line to push. Instead, American forces adopted a strategy known as island hopping, capturing key Japanese-held islands one by one, each one bringing American bombers closer to Japan itself, while bypassing other heavily fortified islands entirely. It began at Guadalcanal in 1942, 6 brutal months of jungle warfare, disease, and naval battles that first proved American forces could beat the Japanese military on the ground. It continued through Tarawa, the Marshall Islands, and Saipan, each landing costly, each island fiercely defended, often to the last man, since Japanese military doctrine treated surrender as a profound dishonor. In February 1945, American Marines landed on Iwo Jima, a tiny volcanic island just 8 square miles in size, but strategically vital as an emergency landing strip for damaged bombers returning from raids on Japan. Japanese defenders had spent months turning the island into a fortress of tunnels and hidden bunkers. The fighting was some of the most vicious of the entire war. Of roughly 21,000 Japanese defenders, fewer than 1,000 survived. Nearly 7,000 U.S. Marines were killed taking it. It was on Iwo Jima that a photograph was taken of 6 Marines raising the American flag atop Mount Suribachi, an image that would become one of the most reproduced photographs in American history, and later the model for the Marine Corps War Memorial in Washington, D.C. 2 months later came Okinawa, the largest and bloodiest battle of the Pacific War, lasting nearly 3 months. Japan unleashed a new and terrifying weapon there: kamikaze pilots, deliberately crashing explosive-laden aircraft into American ships. Over 12,000 Americans died at Okinawa, and Japanese military and civilian deaths numbered well over 100,000, including many civilians who were told American forces would show no mercy and took their own lives rather than surrender. Okinawa gave American military planners a grim preview. If the Japanese home islands themselves had to be invaded, casualties could run into the hundreds of thousands, on both sides. For years, a secret so closely guarded that even Vice President Harry Truman knew almost nothing about it had been underway across the United States. The Manhattan Project, a massive scientific effort to build the world's first atomic weapon before Nazi Germany could. On July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico desert, that effort culminated in the Trinity test, the first successful detonation of a nuclear weapon in history. Germany had already surrendered by this point. The question now was whether, and how, to use this new weapon against Japan. President Truman, who had taken office after Roosevelt's death in April 1945, faced an agonizing decision. Military planners estimated an invasion of Japan could cost enormous numbers of American and Japanese lives. Japan had shown at Okinawa and Iwo Jima that it intended to fight to the last soldier and civilian. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. An estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people were killed instantly, with tens of thousands more dying from injuries and radiation in the months that followed. 3 days later, on August 9, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, killing an estimated 40,000 people immediately. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender in a radio broadcast to his people, the first time most had ever heard his voice. The formal surrender was signed on September 2, 1945, aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, one that claimed an estimated 70 to 85 million lives worldwide, was finally over. The decision to use atomic weapons remains one of the most debated moral questions of the 20th century, and reasonable people, historians, veterans, ethicists, continue to disagree about it to this day. What is not in dispute is the scale of what followed. The world had entered the nuclear age, and nothing about global power would ever look the same again. Over 400,000 Americans died in World War II. Millions more came home changed forever, carrying wounds, visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. Those who survived came home to a country transformed by the war they just fought. The GI Bill sent millions of veterans to college and helped them buy homes, fueling an economic boom and building the American middle class of the post-war era. The United States emerged from the war as the world's dominant economic and military power, a position it holds, in many ways, to this day. Today, the number of World War II veterans still alive grows smaller every year. But the choices made in those 6 years, at Pearl Harbor, at Normandy, on Iwo Jima, in a New Mexico desert, still shape the world we live in. It is, perhaps, the most consequential chapter in American history. And it began, on a quiet Sunday morning, with the sound of engines in the sky over Hawaii.